So, guys, I want to do a tough video today, and I want to talk about, the time that I've been smacked over food. That, sometimes when we have children, many people may disagree with this, but sometimes it's appropriate to hit your child. Like I remember like one time in high school, I was being stupid. I was like picking my nose in public, and my dad smacked me. When I had my finger up my nose because of my nose itch. That's why I was doing it. But I remember when he smacked me, like there was blood coming out of my nose because he made sure to hit my hand so I'd go in a little bit. There are times when, like I've talked about in another video that I had an issue with a younger brother running out of the house a couple of times. And he was hitting me, punching me, biting me, cursing. And then I just put him over my knee and I spanked him, about like 20 times really, to get the message to him about respecting others really. And he had to be, roughly maybe 4 to 5 years old really. But it was really needed. But then there are times when we hit our children and it's not really appropriate. That I remember like one time I went to the Chowder Pot in Branford, Connecticut, and they have these like honey buns. So what happened was that they'll give you a big basket, and then there's like like these it's basically biscuits with like honey on it. And I remember I remember reaching for one because everybody was reaching for one, but I remember my dad smacking me hard as he could. And he told me to go to the bathroom and wash my hands, but he never did that to anybody else really. And it was one of those things too where it's kind of like disrespectful in a way because I really felt that maybe like he wanted me. I think like the reason why he wanted that to happen really was because I was serving myself first, and sometimes when food comes to a table or it's like a buffet or whatever, sometimes the parents will be like, what, the adults eat first, or the youngest kid. My younger brother, like, we got to make sure he gets some honey buns. We have to make sure he gets some of the fun food because we don't want him screaming like a maniac and whatever really. But that really made me angry for two reasons. Because sometimes one of the reasons why parents slap or hit a certain child is because of bullying. Like what, you don't stand up for yourself. You're gonna take it. And then another thing was that I remember like my dad did it from my grandmother. My grandmother was kind of like covering her mouth, like a little shocked that he would do that. And that's also something that happens too with some parents, that sometimes maybe the grandparents have to kind of step in and be like, hey, like, why are you hitting my grandson over, honey buns? And I also was saying too that sometimes, there's some patriarchal or matriarchal thing where parents are like, what, you're my kid. I have a right to smack you as much as I want to. I have a right to hit you as much as I can, really, even if it's for the smallest offenses, really. So I kind of felt that was more like a power trip type of thing, or more like, as I said, that my younger brother was a spoiled brat. So more likely, oh, well, I don't want him screaming and yelling. So you're going to like, not have what you want really. The next thing that happened was that I talked about the Christmas party in another video where we had a rule in the household, and the rule was, two slices of bread, um, two like pieces of meat, and like maybe a slice of cheese, whatever constitutes sandwich. There are particular rules, and one of the reasons why my parents did that was because two things. My parents are cheap, and the other thing too is that me and my brother had big appetites. Like I had a high metabolism, but my older brother was slightly overweight. And they wanted to teach us portion control, and they also wanted to teach us, what, I'm not going to go down to the Big Y in Guilford and like buy all this food for you. You know what? And many parent, and that was also kind of like an old philosophy too. Like have your kids starve. Like I know, like one time I'd usually go over to my girlfriend's house a lot in high school and be fed really. Or I know like sometimes what happened was when I would work at a store, Bishop's Orchard, sometimes I would buy like apples or snacks or whatever really, because what my parents portioned me wasn't enough really. I remember sometimes getting headaches after eating in my parents' house. I was kind of like, what, that's not enough. I remember sometimes when we went over Thanksgiving, like years and years ago, my brother would go to a restaurant first and get a meal there, or go to Denny's, get a meal there, and then go to my parents' place because they were all about, small portions. And I do understand that as they say with human beings, we're not, we need to eat smaller portions, but we're not trained to eat smaller portions. You look at the Spartans and a lot of other like warrior cultures where they ate enough to feed them to the next day really. and some of that was like 2,000 calories or whatever, and they were kind of fed in a way to kind of like make sure they didn't get really really big. And I also understand American culture, like junk food, fast food, all that other stuff. One of the reasons why, one of the reasons why a lot of people try to how should I kind of say this? One of the reasons why a lot of people try to encourage people to eat as much as they can is because obviously, then, when somebody's about to die from bad health, really, they just like, or they can build them all they want in the hospital, really. So we're kind of in a culture of gorging too much, really. But it was kind of like a little messed up that my dad smacked me over taking too many slices of meat. And he was like smiling and grinning when he did that, really. So, and two things is it's a power trip because it's almost like, you're my kid. I can smack you in front of the relatives, really, just to show that, I'm dad. I can do what I want, really. And then also too, I remember like my aunt talking to me a little bit and saying like, I don't agree with what your father does. And sometimes I know like one time we had schnauzers and they're kind of yapping a lot. I remember my dad said in front of my aunt, I wish I can drown those two dogs, to just so I can have some peace and quiet, really. So, it's kind of unfortunate when, sometimes parents will do that where they're like, okay, as I said, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to actually, I'm actually going to smack my kid. I'm actually going to I'm gonna like do whatever really, over like small infractions such as, eating a little too much food. Like as I said, man, you run track, I ran track, forced to run track, I had to walk the dog, I worked the job, I did a lot of other things, and you're smacking me over, you're smacking me over just having like, going from 2 cold cuts to like 3 or 4 cold cuts. Like what the hell, really. And then I know like when my brother went to lived on his own, and when he'd come home as a house guest, same exact thing. Like he would be drinking all the beer that he wanted. He would be like eating all the food that he wanted. Like my parents kind of really like spoiled him. But it always seemed like with me, my parents were kind of like, I'm going to save the smack for you. You got to follow the rules. You got to do this. You got to do that. Like double standards. And I disagree with that because I say like you treat all your children the same, really. Type of thing. Or I remember like, how should I kind of say this? Like I had a younger brother who had really bad eating habits. I talked about this too, where, a couple of times. I remember like one time, how he'd eat pizza as a little kid is that he would just like take all the cheese and pepperoni off and not eat the bread and the sauce part. Or when we had Chinese chicken, he would just take the sweet sauce, suck it off the Chinese chicken, and then spit it out and not eat and have a big flip out over the actual chicken part. Like honestly, a smack would be reserved for something like that, really wasting food, spitting out food at the table because you want to have unhealthy eating habits. Or or it was only like one time, like I remember my dad standing up to my younger brother. Like I remember like, one time my dad bought my other father a trip to Paris for Valentine's Day, and he also got him a bunch of candies, but my younger brother kept putting his hand on the table, trying to take my dad's candy. My dad kept smacking his hand hard as he could until he learned that just because there's candy, you gotta stop being a goddamn glutton, really. So, it is kind of interesting, like how sometimes we're minimal. I also remember, I also am trying to think about another time because they always say like 3 times, but I also oh okay yeah, like I remember like in high school, what happened was that like again sometimes like I would work at a store, and what I would do is like I would like buy like food for myself, really. So I'd buy like like maybe a hot dog or whatever, if I was, because they had me do a job help, do like job help, or like what's it called, like they like job training or things like that in high school. And I also remember, and this is kind of like not good really, is that I would work at a store after school, so sometimes I'd buy things like yogurt or a block of cheese or whatever, and I'll keep it in the back of the refrigerator. Or sometimes if it was really cold, I'll just keep my backpack in the garage and keep that in my backpack all night, really, because it's natural refrigeration. But I remember like my dad finding out about it, and him just saying something like, something like, I'm gonna like talk to I'm gonna like, we're doing your psychiatric evaluation. I'm gonna talk to them about your weirdness of like eating cheese or whatever, really. Honestly, like, if you're getting like a psychiatric evaluation in high school and other shit like that, and like eating cheese or eating a block of cheese, or having extra meals or whatever, and you want to put that in a psychiatric evaluation to say that's impulse control issues or that's part of autism or regular behavior, like get the fuck out of there, or I know like one time when I was like a little kid, what happened was that my dad bought me and my brother like a big packet of Oreos, like Halloween Oreos. And I remember like what happened was that because my brother was a glutton, he actually ate all that and saved me none really. And there was no smack in his face. There was no like anything. My dad bought me another pack and said like I'm the only one who can have it really. But it was one of those things too where once again it's interesting. You smack one child for infractions like having too much food, or you smack a child. For having way too much, for having one or two pieces of cold cuts. He was like maybe a little underweight, but another kid, you don't smack, who's clearly overweight and eats like a packet of Oreos at like 7 or 8 years old, really, because he can't control, his pardon my language, his fat fuck behavior, really. Call it for what it is, really. Or you can't control a younger kid who was a spoiled brat, really, and always had to eat the sweets, always like had to, eat pizza in the most unhealthy ways, always had to eat sesame chicken in disgusting ways, such as sucking off the sweet sauce, spitting out the chicken, really, and crying and throwing a huge protest when my dad wants him to eat the broccoli along with it because his brain was kind of wired of unhealthy, 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 unhealthy. Or I know like my dad would always one time my dad almost knocked me off a stool because what happened was that I was a little naive really. So he told my younger brother, there's no soda in the house. There's no soda in the house, and then because I'm a little naive really, I was like saying, oh, well, there's soda in the pantry. I almost said that. My dad almost shoved me off a stool, really, and almost knocked me to the ground because he didn't want my younger brother to be like, okay, now it's there. He's going to get into it. Or not doing something, saying, okay, there's a soda. Oh, by the way, pick up the kid, spank him at least 10 times, and say to him, hey, you know what, little man, you're not going to have any of that soda, really. You need to learn that you can't have your way, really. You don't run shit. You're not the adult. So those are examples that I've been smacked over food. And I think like the big thing I want to talk about, because I think part of these things is not just it's not just to badger, not just to bash really. The thing about it is that number one, it's important to encourage healthy eating habits. And it's also important to encourage when we raise children, no double standards. The youngest and the oldest get treated the same way. The other thing that I will say is that ultimately, sometimes maybe kids lack some etiquette. Or maybe at a restaurant, if somebody says, or if there's a kid reaching for food, or there's a kid, going to the buffet and he's taking too much, or maybe he's not paying attention and he cuts person or whatever really, or maybe there's a omelet station. They say, oh, I want to have like six eggs or something. There's something to do outside of saying something like, I'm going to smack you, whatever really. You're going to be like, hey, why are you eating this? Like, what were you doing during the day? Were you running track? Were you doing this? Were you doing that? Okay, if you were doing that, maybe we'll talk about, okay, you can have a little bit extra, but you can't just have no self-control, really. Or I like what some parents do, where if they have their kid that go to McDonald's or binge on that or take too much food, they'll be like, okay, you know what, now we're going to go to the high school track and you're going to run a couple of laps, really, just so you get all those calories out. Or you got to do some extra chores, really, because just to say, hey, you know what, you're not going to like sit on that extra food. You're going to actually do some extra work, really. That's more appropriate than smacking a child over it. And then the other thing too is that also too, we got to treat our children fairly. If you have a kid that's overweight and they have an issue with taking too much food, you got to be like, hey, we got to teach you portion control. Hey, we got to teach you a healthy weight. Hey, we got to bring you to the hospital so you can look at all the diabetics and see like their limbs cut off and see like their bodies and everything like that. So you can kind of get understanding of what happens when you don't control your fat fuck behavior, really. But also too, I always believe that more food, more work. Really, just like everybody hates Chris. The reason why Julius gets the biggest piece of chicken is because obviously he goes out and works while nobody else does that really, and that's kind of why that was a big deal. That was kind of like why that was such a big deal. But people kind of translate that into two things. That number one, there are some parents who are really cheap, who don't feed their children that well, and there's a difference between like getting the right amount of nourishment and saying, you know what, you're not going to take a little bit extra, and that was my situation. And then there are people who intentionally underfeed their kids, and other things like that. And I also understand there's situations where parents are really really wealthy, so they're like, okay, you know what, you go to the restaurant with my credit card, we're going to order out every single night, and that's that. Or there's also another thing too where parents like don't have any self control, so you have like 10-year-old kids with diabetes and whatever, drinking all the sodas, eating all the McDonald's that they can really. But importantly, healthy eating habits are important, but we cannot teach that through smacking someone in the face really over that stuff. And like imagine if I told a teacher in school, "Oh, why are you upset?" "Oh, well, my dad smacked me in front of the relatives this weekend because I took an extra slice of cold cuts." "Oh, well, when you take my shirt off, you can see my heart beating." Child Protective Services for that one.